The unseen observer. The familiar rhythm of hooves on cobblestones, usually a mere backdrop to the Duke of Blackwood's days, resonated with unusual intensity this morning, vibrating beneath his boots long after he'd dismounted. He moved through the clamour of the marketplace, a silent figure observing London's vibrant tableau. The bustling stalls, the cries of hawkers, the parade of ladies in bonnets and gentlemen in tailored coats. He sought no specific item, yet he hunted for everything. Or rather, for her. Miss Eleanor Vance had become a persistent fixation, her defiance and that spark of refusal in her eyes having ignited an unfamiliar fire within him. While he had pursued women before, none had commanded this singular, unyielding focus. As a duke, his desires were accustomed to swift fulfillment. Her resistance, far from deterring him, merely sharpened his resolve. He located her near a flower stall, her head bowed over a bouquet of lavender, its delicate fragrance surely perfuming the air around her. She wore a simple dove-grey gown, unadorned, yet it possessed an understated elegance that eclipsed the more elaborate silks and satins surrounding her. Her hair, the hue of burnished copper, was swept into a loose chignon, a few tendrils escaping to frame her flawless profile. A knot tightened in his stomach. He'd exhausted every avenue, discreet invitations, extravagant gifts, even a calculated public display of interest at Lady Ashworth's ball. Each overture had been met with polite yet firm refusal. Though a duke, not a lovesick boy, a flush of heat rose in his cheeks at the memory of her cool dismissals. He had never been so thoroughly thwarted. As he watched, a man approached her, Lord Harrington, tall and impeccably dressed, his smile a touch too wide, his hand reaching a fraction too quickly for hers. Blackwood's jaw clenched. Harrington was a known fop, his conquests as numerous as another man's rare books. The Duke observed the flicker of annoyance in Eleanor's eyes, the subtle stiffening of her shoulders, even as she offered a polite, strained smile. A surprising surge of protectiveness coursed through Blackwood. He desired her for himself, yes, but he also recognized a genuine discomfort in her, a vulnerability she rarely revealed. Harrington, blind to her subtle cues, leaned in, whispering something that brought a flush to Eleanor's cheeks. She pulled her hand away, a clear refusal in her movement, and the Duke's admiration for her resolve deepened. She resisted not only him, but anyone who presumed too much. He decided then. His current strategy of subtle overtures and calculated displays was failing. Eleanor Vance was not a woman to be won through conventional means. She demanded something more, something bolder. Something that would eliminate all doubt, both in her mind and in the minds of London society. Later that evening, in the hushed opulence of his study, Blackwood paced, the Persian rug muffling his footsteps. A decanter of brandy sat untouched on his mahogany desk. He considered his options, each one a strategic chess move. He could retreat, accept her refusal, and move on. The thought tasted like ash. He could escalate his private pursuit, sending more lavish gifts, more persistent letters. But he knew, instinctively, that this would only alienate her further. She valued her independence, her dignity, and he respected that. No, this called for something unprecedented, a public declaration, a move that would irrevocably bind them in the eyes of everyone who mattered. He understood the risk. It could backfire spectacularly, cementing her disdain, turning her into a public spectacle. It could also brand him a desperate fool, but the alternative, walking away, was no longer an option. He had to know. He had to try. He stopped at the window, gazing out at the gas lamps illuminating the London night. His reflection stared back, resolute. He would not be deterred. He would not be denied. Not this time. He would make a move so audacious, so public, that it would force her hand, and in doing so, compel society to take notice. He turned from the window, his mind made up. He would attend Lady Pemberton's soirée tomorrow evening, a grand affair, a gathering of the Tons elite. And there, before everyone, he would make his intentions undeniably clear. He would ask for her hand, not in a quiet, private moment, but in a way that left no room for retreat, for either of them. The thought sent a jolt of both fear and exhilaration through him. This was a colossal gamble, but the prize was Eleanor Vance, and for her, he would risk everything. The game was about to change. His butler, Thompson, a stoic man, entered the study, his movements as silent as a shadow. "Your Grace, a message just arrived from Lord Ashworth." Blackwood took the sealed note, breaking the wax with a decisive snap. He scanned the contents, a faint smile playing on his lips. Lord Ashworth, it seemed, was hosting an impromptu gathering for a few close friends before Lady Pemberton's soirée. Eleanor Vance, the note stated, was expected to attend. Perfect. The stage was set. He folded the note, his gaze distant, already envisioning the scene. He would not merely propose, he would make a statement that would reverberate through London society, forever linking his name with hers. He would leave no doubt about his intentions, about his commitment, and in doing so, he hoped, he would finally break through her carefully constructed defences and reveal the woman he knew lay beneath. The woman who, he believed, was meant to be his. A bold refusal. Lady Pemberton's ballroom throbbed with a lively pulse, a delicate thrum of violins weaving through hushed conversations and the whisper of silk. Crystal chandeliers shimmered, bathing London's elite in a warm, gilded light. Eleanor, perched on a brocade settee beside her Aunt Matilda, felt a tremor of disquiet despite the festive air. The Duke of Blackwood had registered in her periphery almost instantly upon entry, his formidable presence a dark counterpoint to the pastel-clad throng. He had not yet approached, a detail that sharpened her growing apprehension. His recent quietude felt less like capitulation and more like a coiled spring. Lord Harrington, oblivious to the simmering tension, droned on about a recent Egyptian discovery, his voice an unheeded counterpoint to Eleanor's mounting anxiety. She offered a vague nod, her gaze flitting towards the Duke, now positioned near the grand entrance, his eyes unmistakably fixed on her. A shiver, not entirely unpleasant, traced her spine. His expression was an enigma, a blend of unwavering resolve and a predator's keen focus. Suddenly the music mellowed, and a pocket of the room hushed as the Duke began to stir. He charted a direct course towards them, his bearing commanding immediate attention, drawing glances and sending murmurs rippling through the crowd like wind through a wheat field. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Aunt Matilda, sensing the shift, stilled her fan, eyes widening. The Duke halted before Eleanor, his dark gaze sweeping over her, lingering on the faint blush that had bloomed on her cheeks. A faint, knowing smile touched his lips. "Miss Vance," he articulated, his voice a low resonance that carried surprisingly well in the suddenly quieted space. "Might I claim a moment of your time?" Lord Harrington, flustered by the intrusion, attempted to interject. "Duke, I believe Miss Vance and I were—" Blackwood's gaze flickered to Harrington, a silent, withering dismissal that instantly silenced the younger man. Then his attention returned to Eleanor, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. He withdrew a small, velvet-covered box from his coat pocket. The entire room seemed to hold its collective breath. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She knew, with a dreadful certainty, what was about to unfold. A public declaration. Here. Now. Her stomach lurched. The audacity, the sheer effrontery of it stole her breath. He knelt, not fully, but enough to convey his intent, extending the box. He opened it, revealing a ring, a magnificent sapphire encircled by diamonds glinting under the chandeliers. "Miss Eleanor Vance," he proclaimed, his voice imbued with unshakable conviction. "I offer you my hand, my heart, and my name. Will you do me the honor of becoming my Duchess?" A collective gasp feathered through the ballroom. The ensuing silence was so profound, Eleanor could hear the frantic rhythm of her own pulse. All eyes converged on her. The weight of their collective anticipation pressed down, suffocating. Aunt Matilda beside her looked on the verge of swooning. Eleanor met the Duke's gaze. There was no hint of humour or doubt in his eyes, only resolute expectation. He truly believed she would assent, that she must assent. This was his checkmate. But the sheer force of his presumption ignited a spark of defiance within her. To be cornered, to be forced into such a public spectacle, left her with only one choice, even if it meant risking her standing. She closed her hand over the velvet box, not to accept the ring, but to gently guide it back towards him. Her voice, though soft, carried with surprising clarity in the hushed chamber. "Your Grace," she began, her chin lifting fractionally, "I am honoured by your proposal." Her pause was deliberate, allowing hope to flicker in his eyes, in the eyes of the onlookers. Then she continued, her voice firm. "However, I cannot accept." The murmurs that erupted this time were not whispers, but an astonished roar, quickly suppressed, yet undeniably audible. Lord Harrington gaped. Aunt Matilda let out a choked sound. The Duke of Blackwood, still on one knee, his hand still extended with the sapphire, froze. His eyes, usually so unreadable, flickered with genuine surprise, then a slow, intense fascination. Colour drained from his face, replaced by a stark paleness that only accentuated the dark intensity of his gaze. Eleanor rose, her composure remarkably intact despite the tremble in her knees. She met his stunned gaze directly. "I apologize if I have caused you any embarrassment, Your Grace," she stated, her voice betraying none of the turmoil within. "But my answer, regrettably, remains no." With that, she executed a perfect, elegant curtsy, a gesture that spoke volumes of her resolve, and then, head held high, turned and walked away, leaving the Duke of Blackwood kneeling amidst the shocked silence, the glittering sapphire still extended in his hand. The ballroom erupted into a cacophony of speculation and scandalized whispers in her wake. She could feel his eyes on her back, a burning sensation that promised this was far from over. The collective gasp that followed Eleanor's rejection seemed to suck the very air from the ballroom. Duke Blackwood, still on one knee, his sapphire ring glinting mockingly, looked less like a rejected suitor and more like a man who'd just been struck by lightning. His meticulously composed features, usually a mask of aristocratic indifference, crumpled into a momentary flash of disbelief, then a slow, dangerous anger. Eleanor, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, met his gaze with a defiant lift of her chin. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room upon her, 1,000 judgments forming in the silent chasm she had created. Lady Pemberton, ever the pragmatist, was the first to break the tableau. Her shrill, "Eleanor, what have you done?" cut through the stunned silence. But it was too late. The dam had broken. Whispers, like a sudden gust of wind, swept through the ballroom. Scandalous. Unheard of. The Duke of Blackwood. Eleanor, acutely aware of the precariousness of her position, offered the Duke a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "My apologies, Your Grace, for any misunderstanding. I believe I have made my position clear." She turned, intending to make a swift, dignified exit, but a firm hand clamped around her elbow. It was the Duke. His touch, though not overtly aggressive, held an undeniable possessiveness that sent a shiver down her spine. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low growl that barely reached her ears, "you have made a grave mistake." "Perhaps, Your Grace," she retorted, pulling her arm free with a sharp tug. "But it is my mistake to make." With that, she navigated the sea of curious, disapproving faces, her head held high, and vanished into the night. The following morning brought no respite. Eleanor, still reeling from the events of the previous evening, found her quiet breakfast interrupted by the arrival of a messenger. A small velvet box lay nestled on the silver tray, identical to the one the Duke had presented. Inside, the sapphire gleamed, accompanied by a terse note. "My offer stands. Blackwood." A cold dread settled in her stomach. This wasn't a gentleman accepting a refusal. This was a man accustomed to getting his way, and her defiance had only piqued his interest. Over the next few days, the Duke's persistence became a relentless assault. Flowers arrived daily, vibrant and fragrant, filling her modest drawing room until it resembled a hothouse. Each bouquet was accompanied by a note, increasingly concise, increasingly insistent. Invitations to every significant social event of the season materialized on her doorstep, always delivered by his personal footman, always with the implied expectation of her presence. Eleanor refused them all. She developed a profound allergy to lilies, a sudden indisposition that kept her confined, a prior engagement that magically appeared on her calendar. Her efforts, however, proved futile. The Duke of Blackwood, it seemed, was a man who understood a refusal only as a temporary delay. One afternoon, seeking solace in the anonymity of the public gardens, Eleanor found herself cornered. She had been admiring a particularly vibrant rosebush when a shadow fell over her. "Miss Vance." The Duke's voice, smooth as polished granite, sent a jolt through her. She turned, her hand instinctively tightening on the parasol she carried. "Your Grace," she said, her tone clipped. "I was not aware you frequented these public spaces." He offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Nor I, until recently. I find the pursuit of certain rare specimens quite invigorating." His gaze, dark and intense, felt like a physical touch. "Why do you persist in this charade, Miss Vance? My offer is more than generous. You would be afforded a position of power, wealth beyond measure, and the protection of my name." "And my autonomy, Your Grace?" she challenged, her voice rising slightly. "My freedom to choose my own path. These are not trivial matters to be bartered for wealth." "Freedom, Miss Vance," he mused, stepping closer, his presence utterly eclipsing the sunlight, "can often be an illusion. What you perceive as freedom, I see as vulnerability. And what you perceive as generosity, I see as a cage. Eleanor's voice was steady, despite the tremor in her hands. She met his gaze squarely, refusing to be intimidated. I have made my decision, Your Grace. I will not marry you. A flicker of something unreadable, frustration, fascination, crossed his features. And I, Miss Vance, have decided I will not accept your refusal. Before Eleanor could formulate a reply, a woman's voice, saccharine sweet and dripping with false concern, interrupted them. Duke Blackwood! And Miss Vance! What a delightful coincidence. Lady Octavia Thorne, a woman whose beauty was only outmatched by her venomous gossip, emerged from behind a flowering trellis, a predatory smile gracing her lips. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, darted between Eleanor and the Duke, already piecing together a narrative for the evening's drawing rooms. I do hope I'm not interrupting a private discussion? Her tone left no doubt as to the implication. Eleanor felt a wave of despair wash over her. This was exactly the kind of unwanted attention she had hoped to avoid. The Duke, however, merely offered Lady Octavia a curt nod, his expression unreadable. Eleanor knew, with a sinking certainty, that her defiance had not only earned her the Duke's relentless pursuit, but also the dangerous interest of society's most formidable rival. This unwanted attention was only just beginning. Whispers and worries. The clatter of carriage wheels seemed to echo the frantic beat of Eleanor's heart as she returned from the gardens. Lady Thorne's interruption had been a reprieve, but it had also solidified her status as the unwitting star of society's most compelling drama. Her drawing room, usually a sanctuary of quiet reflection, now felt like a cage, its walls closing in with every whispered speculation she imagined. Mrs. Albright, her usually unflappable housekeeper, wrung her hands. The Duke's footman, miss. They brought more gifts. Her voice, typically a crisp pronouncement, was a hesitant murmur. Flowers, a crate of champagne, and a jewel box. He even left a note, saying he hoped you'd found the afternoon stimulating. Eleanor felt a cold dread seep into her bones. Stimulating? He had cornered her, openly defied her refusal, and then had the audacity to suggest she'd enjoyed it. Burn the note, Mrs. Albright. Return the gifts. All of them. But miss, Mrs. Albright began, looking genuinely distressed. The Duke's reputation. My reputation, Mrs. Albright, is what we must be concerned with, Eleanor cut in, her voice sharper than intended. She knew the societal dangers of spurning a man of Blackwood's standing, but to accept his persistent overtures would be an even greater capitulation. Later that evening, a discreet summons arrived from her Aunt Agatha, a woman whose life was a carefully curated tapestry of social obligation and veiled manipulation. Eleanor found her in the dimly lit salon, her face etched with a familiar blend of concern and calculated appraisal. Eleanor, darling, Aunt Agatha purred, her eyes usually sharp, now brimming with a theatrical sympathy. Such a spectacle. Society is ablaze. The Duke. He's quite taken with you, isn't he? Eleanor bristled. He's quite presumptuous, Aunt. I made my feelings clear. Aunt Agatha sighed, stirring her tea with a delicate silver spoon. Clarity, my dear, is often a matter of interpretation. To a man like Blackwood, a refusal can be seen as an invitation to a more challenging game. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. There are whispers, you see, of his unwavering nature, of how he always gets what he wants. I am not an object to be acquired, Eleanor stated, her jaw tight. Of course not, dear, Aunt Agatha said, though her gaze suggested she believed precisely the opposite. But there are implications. Your standing, your future. A prolonged rejection of such a powerful figure can turn sour. People begin to wonder why. Eleanor knew exactly what her aunt meant. Society, in its relentless pursuit of drama, would soon cast her as either a cunning siren or a foolish, stubborn girl. Neither boded well. The next morning, Eleanor sought out her dearest friend Clara, whose practical nature often anchored Eleanor's more impetuous spirit. Clara, always direct, listened to Eleanor's account with a frown deepening on her brow. He is a dangerous man, Eleanor, Clara said, folding her hands in her lap. Not in the way he would physically harm you, but in the way he will suffocate you with his attention until you have no room to breathe. And he thrives on public display, doesn't he? It feels that way, Eleanor admitted, pacing the length of Clara's elegant drawing room. Like he's trying to wear me down publicly, to make me yield through sheer exhaustion. And you cannot, Clara stated, her voice firm. You must stand your ground, Eleanor, but you must also be careful. This is not a man who accepts a simple no and moves on. His reputation precedes him in that regard. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, not from the Duke, but from Lord Ashworth, a man Eleanor considered a pleasant acquaintance, if a little dull. The note was an invitation to a private viewing of a rare botanical collection, an event usually reserved for the most discerning connoisseurs. It was an unexpected, almost pointed, gesture of normalcy in the swirling chaos. An odd timing, Clara observed, turning the invitation over in her hand. Ashworth is hardly known for his spontaneity. Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps not all doors were closing. Perhaps there were still avenues for her to assert her independence, to demonstrate that her life was not solely defined by the Duke's relentless pursuit. She would attend. It was a small act of defiance, a quiet assertion that her world extended beyond the Duke's calculating gaze. She would not be confined to his narrative. Later that afternoon, a delivery arrived. Not gifts, but a stack of anonymous letters tied with a black ribbon. Their contents were vicious, insinuating that Eleanor was a conniving social climber, deliberately toying with the Duke for attention. The ink bled slightly on the cheap paper, the words sharp and cruel. She knew the venomous undertones of society, but to see it written so baldly made her stomach clench. The whispers were growing louder, more insidious, and far more dangerous than she had anticipated. Someone was actively working to poison her reputation, and Blackwood's pursuit was merely fuel for the fire. The game had just escalated. A spirited confrontation. The crisp autumn air, usually a balm, felt like a whip against Eleanor's cheeks as she descended from the carriage at Lady Danbury's afternoon soirée. The anonymous letters, their venomous words still seared into her mind, had cast a long shadow over the day. Each rustle of silk, every hushed murmur from the arriving guests, seemed to carry a hint of judgment. Yet she held her head high, a defiant tilt to her chin that belied the tremor in her hands. Inside, the grand ballroom was a kaleidoscope of vibrant gowns and polished smiles. The scent of lily of the valley mingled with expensive cologne, a heady aroma that usually delighted her, but now felt cloying. She spotted Lord Ashworth by the central fountain, his golden hair catching the light as he conversed animatedly with a group of debutantes. He offered a polite bow and a warm smile when he saw her, his eyes twinkling with genuine pleasure. "Miss Vance, you look absolutely radiant," he complimented, his voice a smooth baritone. "I had hoped you would grace us with your presence." Before Eleanor could properly respond, a shadow fell over them. The Duke of Blackwood, a formidable figure in a perfectly tailored black coat, stood a few paces away, his gaze fixed solely on Eleanor. The air around them seemed to thicken, the ambient chatter fading into a distant hum. Lord Ashworth's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of apprehension. "Ashworth," the Duke acknowledged with a clipped nod, his voice a low rumble that cut through the polite murmurings. His eyes, dark and intense, then returned to Eleanor. "Miss Vance, a pleasant surprise." "Indeed, Your Grace," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the sudden spike of her pulse. "I find myself quite enjoying the unexpected." A slow, possessive smile spread across the Duke's lips, a gesture that sent a shiver down her spine. "Do you know? Perhaps we share more inclinations than you imagine." Lord Ashworth, sensing the escalating tension, cleared his throat. "If you'll excuse us, Your Grace, I was just about to offer Miss Vance some refreshment." The Duke's gaze hardened. "I believe Miss Vance is capable of expressing her own desires, Ashworth." He turned back to Eleanor, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Are you enjoying the company, Eleanor?" The use of her given name, so intimate and possessive, was a deliberate challenge. Eleanor felt a rush of indignation. "I find Lord Ashworth to be a most agreeable companion, Your Grace," she retorted, injecting a touch of frost into her tone. "Unlike some, he respects the boundaries of conversation." A muscle twitched in the Duke's jaw. He took a step closer, his presence utterly dominating. "Boundaries, Miss Vance? I find them rather constricting, especially when there are more interesting paths to explore. And I find unsolicited exploration to be entirely unwelcome," Eleanor shot back, her chin rising defensively. "I am not a landscape to be charted at your convenience, Your Grace." A gasp rippled through a nearby cluster of ladies who had been shamelessly eavesdropping. Their hushed whispers, sharp as shards of glass, carried across the polished floor. "Did you hear that? So bold. What a scandal." Lord Ashworth, visibly uncomfortable, attempted to interject. "Perhaps, Your Grace, we should move away from the main thoroughfare." "This is hardly the place for—" "This is precisely the place for it, Ashworth," the Duke interrupted, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's. "A public declaration of intent. Would you not agree, Miss Vance?" Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He was deliberately cornering her, making a spectacle of their interaction. The anonymous letters had already begun to chip away at her reputation. This open confrontation would only fuel the gossip. Yet, retreat felt like surrender. "Your Grace," she said, her voice dropping to a low, fierce tone, "your intent is of no consequence to me. I have made my position abundantly clear. Your persistence is not charming. It is an imposition. I will not be swayed by public displays or private pressures." The Duke's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something akin to admiration battling with his evident frustration. "You are a remarkably stubborn woman, Eleanor Vance." "And you, Your Grace, are a remarkably obtuse man," she replied, her voice shaking slightly but resolute. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have actual pleasantries to attend to." With a curt nod to Lord Ashworth, who looked torn between admiration and utter horror, Eleanor turned on her heel and walked away, her back ramrod straight, leaving the Duke of Blackwood standing alone, a storm brewing in his dark eyes. The whispers around her intensified, a buzzing cloud of judgment and morbid fascination. She knew she had just poured gasoline on the fire, but for the first time in days, she felt a surge of defiant exhilaration. She was not a pawn in his game. She was a force to be reckoned with. Later, as the soiree wound down, Eleanor found herself cornered by Aunt Agatha, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "Eleanor, what in heaven's name was that performance? Do you have any idea the damage you've done?" "I merely defended myself, Aunt," Eleanor replied, exhaustion seeping into her bones. "Defended yourself? You publicly insulted a duke, the Duke of Blackwood. Do you wish to be ostracized entirely?" Aunt Agatha's voice was a harsh whisper. "The letters are one thing, but this is outright defiance. He will not forgive this, Eleanor. Mark my words, he will make you regret it." A cold dread settled in Eleanor's stomach. Aunt Agatha's words, combined with the Duke's final chilling gaze, echoed the insidious threats from the anonymous letters. The confrontation had been exhilarating, yes, but also deeply unsettling. She had stood her ground, but at what cost? The social tightrope she walked now felt impossibly thin, stretched taut over an abyss of ruin. The serpent's tongue. The cool dawn air did little to soothe Eleanor's simmering indignation. Her aunt's pronouncements had echoed through the carriage ride home, a litany of social suicide and familial disgrace that had grated on Eleanor's already frayed nerves. "A scandal, Eleanor. A public affront to a duke. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Aunt Matilda's face had been a mask of scarlet fury, her fan snapping shut with a sound like a pistol shot. Eleanor had retired to her room, the taste of defiance still exhilarating on her tongue, yet the premonition of retribution clung to her like a shroud. She knew the Duke's sort. Men who wielded power like a blunt instrument, accustomed to unquestioning obedience. Her rejection, particularly in such a public forum, would be a wound to his formidable pride. The following morning, the first serpent's hiss arrived. Not in the familiar, elegant script of the previous anonymous letters, but scrawled in a hasty, almost childish hand on coarse paper. It lay nestled amongst the usual correspondence, invitations, bills, a note from a distant cousin, on the silver tray in the antechamber. Eleanor picked it up, her fingers brushing against the rough texture. She caught scandal, like a moth to a flame. Tonight, she dines at the Montroses, a viper in their nest. The words were crude, the implication clear. Someone was watching her, tracking her movements, and actively seeking to poison perceptions of her. A chill, unlike the premonition of the Duke's wrath, snaked down her spine. This was a different enemy, one who moved in shadows, employing whispers rather than pronouncements. Her dinner engagement at the Montroses that evening became a crucible. The Montrose family, pillars of propriety, were known for their discerning guest list and their keen interest in the latest societal currents. Eleanor arrived, her emerald gown a defiant splash of colour against the muted silks of the other ladies. She was acutely aware of the subtle shifts in conversation when she approached, the lingering glances, the hushed whispers that ceased abruptly. Mrs. Montrose, usually effusive, greeted her with a strained smile, her eyes darting to Eleanor's décolletage as if searching for some visible transgression. The air in the drawing-room felt thick, heavy with unspoken judgment. As the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself isolated, her attempts at polite conversation met with polite but firm deflections. Lady Ashworth, usually so amiable, offered only stiff pleasantries before turning her attention to a particularly dull potted palm. Even Lord Ashworth, typically quick with a witty remark, avoided her gaze. Then came the pointed question, delivered by a Mrs. Albright, whose lips were perpetually pursed as if tasting something sour. "Miss Vance, I heard rumours, quite disturbing, about your conduct at the Blackwood soirée. Is there any truth to them?" Her voice, though soft, carried across the hushed room. Eleanor felt a flush creep up her neck. This was it, the public shaming. She met Mrs. Albright's gaze, her chin lifting instinctively. "My conduct, Mrs. Albright, was precisely what one might expect from a woman who values her independence above all else." Her voice, though steady, held an edge of steel. A ripple of nervous murmurs spread through the room. Lord Montrose cleared his throat, a sound like gravel shifting. "Indeed, Miss Vance, independence is a commendable quality." His tone, however, suggested he found it less commendable when displayed so overtly. The Duke of Blackwood entered then, a shadow falling over the already tense gathering. His presence was a physical force, drawing all eyes, his dark eyes sweeping the room until they landed on Eleanor. A smirk played on his lips, a silent acknowledgement of the very public discomfort she now endured. He moved with predatory grace, making his way directly to her, ignoring the outstretched hands and murmured greetings. "Miss Vance," he purred, his voice a low thrum that sent a shiver down her spine. "You seem subdued tonight. Has the sting of society's disapproval finally pierced your formidable armour?" His eyes held a glint of triumph, a predatory satisfaction. Eleanor's composure, already under siege, threatened to crack. The audacity of him, to gloat in her humiliation, to revel in the very scandal he had helped to orchestrate. She met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I assure you, Your Grace, my armour is quite intact. Unlike some, I do not require the approval of a fickle society to know my own worth." A low chuckle escaped him, a sound that was both amused and dangerous. "A sharp tongue as ever. But even the sharpest blade can be dulled, Miss Vance, if wielded without discretion." He paused, his gaze lingering on her face before adding, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I find myself rather drawn to the challenge of it." The implication was clear. He was far from deterred. In fact, her present predicament seemed to invigorate his pursuit. He was watching her, enjoying her public discomfort, and was prepared to use it as another lever in his relentless campaign. Just as Eleanor braced herself for another verbal parry, the Duke turned, his voice suddenly booming, drawing the attention of every guest in the room. "Indeed, this room feels rather lacking in spirit tonight. Perhaps a change of scenery is in order." He extended his hand, not to Eleanor, but to the room at large. "I find myself with a sudden urge to host a gathering, a masquerade ball, perhaps, at Blackwood Manor. Next week, all of you, consider yourselves invited." A collective gasp swept through the Montrose drawing room. A masquerade ball at Blackwood Manor, hosted at such short notice, was unprecedented. It was a brazen public declaration, a power play designed to reassert his dominance and, Eleanor realized with a sickening lurch, to ensure her presence in his sphere once more. He had just made a move that would bind them, however unwillingly, together again. The invitation, embossed with the Blackwood crest, sat like a dark omen on Eleanor's writing desk. A masquerade, in his home. The blatant audacity of it still made her pulse quicken, with a mixture of anger and a strange, unfamiliar flutter. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a disquieting sense of being drawn into a vortex she couldn't control. Lady Ashworth, a woman whose gossip was as sharp as her wit, had already expressed her deepest sympathies over Eleanor's unfortunate predicament, a thinly veiled condemnation of her public rejection. The social landscape had shifted, and Eleanor found herself on increasingly isolated terrain. A week later, a second anonymous letter arrived, tucked discreetly into her morning post. This one was different. Neatly penned, the words were less of a direct threat and more of a chilling insinuation. Your reputation, dear Miss Vance, is a fragile thing. One misstep, and it will shatter like glass. No signature, no specific demand, just a cold promise of ruin. Eleanor crumpled the paper, a knot tightening in her stomach. Someone was watching, waiting. The thought sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cool autumn air. Determined not to be cowed, Eleanor resolved to attend the masquerade. To refuse would be to admit defeat, to concede to the Duke's unspoken power over her life. She would go, maintain her composure, and leave as swiftly as propriety allowed. Her dress, a deep sapphire silk, was chosen for its understated elegance rather than ostentation. A simple black mask would conceal her identity, though she doubted it would fool the Duke for long. The Blackwood estate hummed with an almost electric energy that evening. Carriages lined the sweeping drive, their lamps casting dancing shadows on the manicured lawns. Inside, the grand ballroom was a kaleidoscope of colour and motion. Masks of every conceivable design, feathered, jewelled, grotesque, sublime, transformed the familiar faces of society into intriguing enigmas. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, punctuated by the lilting strains of a string quartet. Eleanor moved through the throng, a silent observer amidst the masked revelry. She felt a strange detachment, as if she were a ghost haunting her own life. Then, a figure detached itself from a cluster of guests near the champagne fountain. He was tall, his frame lean and powerful, cloaked in a midnight blue velvet coat. His mask, a stark, unadorned black, emphasized the sharp lines of his jaw and the intensity in his eyes. It was the Duke. There was no mistaking him. He began to move towards her, his gaze unwavering. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at Eleanor. She veered sharply, seeking refuge in the dense crowd. As she did, she bumped squarely into someone. A hand shot out, steadying her arm. "My apologies," a low, resonant voice said. Eleanor looked up, her breath catching. He was unmasked, a striking man with kind eyes and a thoughtful expression. He looked to be in his late 20s, his dark hair a little too long, his attire expensive but worn with an easy nonchalance that suggested he cared little for societal strictures. He was a face she did not recognize from her usual circles. "No, the fault is entirely mine," Eleanor replied, her voice slightly breathless. "I was distracted." He smiled, a genuine warmth radiating from him. Indeed. The Duke's balls can be quite overwhelming, especially if one isn't accustomed to such theatricality. Eleanor found herself smiling back, a rare, unforced smile. "And you are?" "Lord Alastair Finch," he offered, bowing slightly. "And you, fair lady, are a vision even behind that rather demure mask. "Miss Eleanor Vance," she replied, feeling an unexpected lightness. "Though I doubt my mask is doing much to preserve my anonymity tonight." Alistair chuckled. Ah, the famously defiant Miss Vance. "I confess I've been rather intrigued by the whispers." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Most women would be falling over themselves for a duke." "And I am not most women," Eleanor stated, a flicker of her usual resolve returning. "Clearly," Alistair said, his eyes twinkling. "Which, I must admit, is rather refreshing." He gestured towards a quieter alcove. "May I procure you a less populated corner, and perhaps a glass of something sparkling? This swirling sea of masquerade can be rather suffocating." Relief washed over Eleanor. She nodded, allowing him to lead her away from the ballroom's central chaos, and more importantly, away from the Duke's approaching silhouette. Alistair was an unexpected balm, a surprising connection in a night she had braced herself to endure alone. As they spoke, she found herself laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in weeks. He spoke of art, of distant travels, of societal absurdities, all with a delightful irreverence that chipped away at her carefully constructed defences. She found herself confiding, in broad strokes, her weariness with the relentless social pressure. Alistair listened intently, his gaze unwavering. "It sounds as though you are caught between a gilded cage and a very sharp rock, Miss Vance," he observed gently. "But remember, even the most formidable walls can have hidden passages." His words resonated deeply. A hidden passage. The idea, though vague, offered a sliver of hope. She felt a burgeoning sense of camaraderie with this stranger, a relief she hadn't realized she desperately needed. For a precious hour, the Duke, the letters, and the weight of society faded into the background. She was simply Eleanor, talking with a kind, intelligent man. But the reprieve was fleeting. A shadow fell over their quiet alcove. Eleanor looked up, her heart sinking. The Duke of Blackwood stood there, his masked face unreadable, his eyes fixed on Alistair. Undeniable sparks. The Duke's eyes, even behind the intricate onyx mask, felt like physical pressure, a weight settling on Eleanor's shoulders. "Lord Finch," he drawled, his voice a low rumble that cut through the music. "I believe Miss Vance was just about to favour me with a dance." Alistair's smile remained unwavering, though a subtle shift in his posture suggested a heightened awareness. "Indeed, Your Grace. Miss Vance seemed quite content with our conversation. Perhaps another time." His gaze flickered to Eleanor, a silent question in its depths. Eleanor, still buzzing from the unexpected ease of Alistair's company, felt a familiar surge of defiance. "Lord Finch is correct, Your Grace. I am rather enjoying our discussion." She met the Duke's masked gaze directly, refusing to yield. A muscle twitched in the Duke's jaw, the only tell beneath the stoic mask. "A pity. I had hoped to offer you a more lively diversion." His hand, gloved in dark leather, extended towards her, an undeniable command in the gesture. The air thrummed with unspoken tension. Eleanor knew refusing him again, especially after their public exchange, would be a monumental affront. Yet, the thought of being pulled into his orbit, even for a single dance, felt like a capitulation. Her gaze drifted to Alistair, who offered a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent encouragement, a reminder of the hidden passages he'd mentioned. Taking a breath, Eleanor placed her hand in the Duke's. His grip was firm, possessive, sending a shiver of something akin to alarm through her. As he led her onto the dance floor, The proximity was immediate and overwhelming. The scent of his cologne, rich and subtly masculine, enveloped her. He moved with an effortless power, guiding her through the intricate steps of the quadrille with a practiced ease that left her little room for error. "Still as stubborn as ever, Miss Vance," he murmured, his voice a low thrum against her ear as they turned. "And you, Your Grace, as presumptuous," she countered, her voice barely a whisper. He chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Is it presumptuous to desire what one finds intriguing?" Eleanor refused to rise to the bait. "Intrigue is a dangerous game, Your Grace, often played with unfortunate consequences." Their dance was a silent battle of wills, a series of calculated movements and veiled exchanges. She felt the eyes of the ballroom on them, a collective anticipation hanging in the air. The Duke's unwavering gaze, even through the mask, felt scrutinizing, as if he were trying to peel back her layers. When the music finally ended, he held her hand for a fraction too long, his thumb tracing a slow, possessive circle on her skin. "A most illuminating dance, Miss Vance," he said, his voice laced with a predatory satisfaction. "Perhaps we shall have another." Before Eleanor could respond, Alistair reappeared, a glass of punch in each hand. "Miss Vance, Your Grace, I believe this dance has concluded." He offered Eleanor a glass, his smile a beacon of genuine warmth that momentarily banished the Duke's intensity. The Duke's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance in their depths. "Indeed. Enjoy your refreshment, Miss Vance." With a curt nod, he turned and melted back into the throng, leaving Eleanor with a lingering sense of unease. "Are you quite all right?" Alistair asked, his voice gentle, his concern genuine. Eleanor exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from her shoulders. "As well as can be expected, Lord Finch." "He truly is insufferable." Alistair chuckled. "He certainly has a way of making his presence known. But you handled him with admirable grace." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "Tell me, Miss Vance, have you considered the possibility that his pursuit, while relentless, might also be a challenge?" Eleanor frowned. "A challenge? To what end?" "To your independence, perhaps, or perhaps to his own perception of control." He took a sip of his punch. "The Duke is not accustomed to refusal. Your defiance, I suspect, both confounds and fascinates him." "It's a fascination I could well do without," Eleanor retorted, though Alistair's words resonated with an uncomfortable truth. She knew her refusal had stung his pride. "Perhaps," Alistair conceded. "But sometimes, in challenging moments, one finds unexpected strengths and unexpected allies." His eyes held hers, a silent promise in their depths. "I believe there are other paths, Eleanor. Paths that don't involve capitulating to his Grace's demands or succumbing to his machinations." His use of her given name, so casual and intimate, sent a flush to her cheeks. She felt a spark, warm and undeniable, igniting within her. It wasn't the unsettling heat the Duke's presence evoked, but a gentler, more hopeful flame. "You speak in riddles, Lord Finch." He smiled, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Do I? Or am I simply suggesting that the most obvious solution is rarely the most effective? The Duke, for all his power, operates within a very rigid framework. There are ways to circumvent such structures." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "Ways that he might not anticipate." The possibility, however vague, offered a tantalizing glimpse of hope. Eleanor felt a surge of exhilaration. "What ways?" "Patience, Eleanor," he murmured, his gaze sweeping the ballroom before returning to her. The night is young, and the masquerade offers many opportunities for creative solutions. He then steered the conversation to lighter topics, his easy wit and insightful observations a welcome balm after the Duke's intensity. Yet even as Alistair made her laugh, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced across the ballroom, her gaze drawn to a shadowed alcove. There, half hidden by a velvet curtain, stood the Duke, his masked face turned towards her. Even from a distance, she could feel the weight of his attention, a silent, possessive claim that sent a fresh shiver down her spine. The undeniable sparks Alistair had ignited were now intertwined with a growing apprehension. She was caught between two powerful forces, and the game had only just begun. The web of lies. The music, a sprightly reel that had once seemed a celebration, now felt like a frantic drumbeat urging Eleanor to a decision. She excused herself from Alistair, promising to return, and sought the relative quiet of a secluded alcove near a fountain, its gentle splash a soothing counterpoint to her racing thoughts. Alistair's words, creative solutions, freedom, a path to independence, echoed in her mind. He offered not just an escape from Blackwood, but a chance to reclaim herself. It was a tempting vision, yet the Duke's possessive gaze still felt like a physical weight, a silken thread around her throat. Could Alistair truly untangle her from such a formidable opponent? A rustle of silk announced a new presence. Lady Ashworth, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes, approached. "Eleanor, my dear, are you quite well? You seem troubled." Eleanor forced a smile. "Just a moment of quiet, Lady Ashworth. The air grows rather warm." Lady Ashworth's smile tightened. "Indeed, and gossip, my dear, warms the air considerably. There are whispers, you see, of a certain impropriety, after Lord Blackwood's very public declaration, to be seen so intimately with Lord Finch. It is quite the topic." A cold knot formed in Eleanor's stomach. "I merely danced with Lord Finch, as I did with many others." "But not with the Duke, after his proposal," Lady Ashworth purred, leaning in conspiratorially. "Such a slight. He is not a man to be trifled with, Eleanor. And to then dance with another, so soon. People are saying, well, they are saying you are playing a dangerous game, and that Lord Finch is perhaps not as honourable as he appears to engage in such a blatant disregard for decorum." Eleanor's jaw clenched. "Lord Finch is a gentleman." "Perhaps," Lady Ashworth conceded, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But his reputation is hardly untarnished. He has a history of entanglements. And now, this with you. It looks rather opportunistic, don't you agree? As if he is using your situation to his own advantage." Lady Ashworth paused, letting her words hang in the air. "I merely wish to warn you, for your own good. Society can be cruel, Eleanor. A young woman's reputation is a fragile thing, and Lord Blackwood, he has a long memory." With a final, pitying look, Lady Ashworth drifted away, leaving Eleanor to wrestle with the insidious seeds of doubt she had sown. Blackwood's shadow fell over her a moment later, enveloping her in his particular scent of expensive tobacco, and something wild, like a storm. He hadn't even bothered with a mask this time. His piercing blue eyes were fully exposed, studying her with an unnerving intensity. "Lady Ashworth always enjoys a good drama," he observed, his voice a low rumble, especially when she can cast herself as the wise oracle. She spoke of whispers, Eleanor began, her voice barely a breath. Indeed. The kind that sprout in fertile ground that you, unfortunately, seem intent on cultivating. He took a step closer, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. Lord Finch, Eleanor, a man of questionable loyalties. His pockets are deeper than his convictions, I assure you. You accuse him of dishonesty, she challenged, her chin rising defensively. I accuse him of ambition, Blackwood corrected, a faint, humorless smile touching his lips. And you, my dear, are merely a pawn in his game. He knows your precarious position. He knows the value of making an enemy of me. It elevates his own standing, you see, to be the one who rescues you from the big, bad Duke. His gaze hardened. Do not be so naive, Eleanor. Everyone at this masquerade wears a mask, some more convincing than others. Finch's mask is that of the charming rescuer, but beneath it lies a calculating mind, far more dangerous than any genuine villain. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Blackwood's words, layered over Lady Ashworth's insinuations, created a suffocating web. Had Alistair truly been sincere? Or was he, as Blackwood suggested, merely using her as a weapon in a larger social war? The idea was chilling, yet Alistair's earlier earnestness had felt so genuine. You believe him to be entirely without integrity? She asked, her voice wavering despite herself. I believe him to be entirely self-serving, Blackwood countered, his eyes never leaving hers. And you, Eleanor, are far too precious to be sacrificed on the altar of his petty vendettas. Do not be fooled by his pretty words and his promises of independence. He offers you a gilded cage, not freedom. A cage of his own making, where you will be forever indebted to him, a trophy in his personal war against me. He took another step, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from him. Think, Eleanor. Truly think. Who truly has your best interests at heart? The weight of his words, the sheer conviction in his voice, pressed down on her. Could Blackwood, for all his arrogance and possessiveness, actually be telling the truth about Alistair? The thought was a dizzying descent into uncertainty. She felt trapped, caught between two powerful men, each with their own agenda, each painting the other as a villain. The masquerade, once a place of intrigue, now felt like a labyrinth of deception, and she, Eleanor Vance, was hopelessly lost within its intricate walls. A Duke's Dilemma. The oppressive weight of the Duke's words lingered, a phantom hand pressing against Eleanor's throat. His dismissal of Alistair, delivered with such chilling certainty, was a carefully aimed blow designed to sever the fragile thread of hope Alistair had offered. Eleanor watched him depart, his broad shoulders disappearing amidst the gilded arches of the ballroom, and felt a profound weariness settle in her bones. The air, once vibrant with music and chatter, now felt thin and suffocating. She needed to escape, to breathe. Slipping away from the periphery of the remaining guests, Eleanor sought the sanctuary of the antechamber, a space typically reserved for cloaks and hushed conversations. The silence there, broken only by the distant strains of a waltz, was a welcome balm. She sank onto a velvet-covered settee, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and suspicion. Was Alistair truly an opportunist, as both Lady Ashworth and the Duke suggested? Or was this another calculated maneuver, a way to isolate her further? A soft rustle of silk announced a new presence. Lady Ashworth, her expression a careful blend of concern and censure, stood framed in the doorway. "My dear Eleanor, there you are. I was quite worried when I saw you slip away. Is everything quite all right?" Her voice, usually so mellifluous, held a brittle edge. Eleanor straightened, summoning a composure she didn't feel. "Perfectly well, Lady Ashworth. I merely sought a moment of quiet." "Quiet is all well and good," Lady Ashworth replied, gliding into the room. "But one must be mindful of appearances. To be seen retreating after such an encounter with His Grace, and then with Lord Finch, it sets tongues wagging, you understand." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "And speaking of Lord Finch, I overheard some rather unsavoury whispers. It seems his financial standing is not quite as robust as he'd like everyone to believe. A man in his position looking for a way to improve his prospects, if you catch my meaning." The implication hung in the air, thick with insinuation. Lady Ashworth's words echoed the Duke's, layering suspicion upon suspicion. Eleanor felt a cold dread begin to solidify in her stomach. Had she been so blinded by the promise of freedom that she'd overlooked the obvious? Was Alistair truly using her? "I assure you, Lady Ashworth," Eleanor began, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to steady it. "Lord Finch has been nothing but kind." Lady Ashworth offered a pitying smile. "Kindness, my dear, can be a most effective cloak for ambition. Be wary, Eleanor. The Duke, for all his intensity, has a certain honour. Lord Finch, however, may be a different sort of creature entirely." She patted Eleanor's hand, a gesture that felt more like a warning than comfort, before gracefully withdrawing. Eleanor was left alone once more, the antechamber now feeling less like a refuge and more like a cage. The Duke's words, Lady Ashworth's whispers, they coalesced into a suffocating narrative, painting Alistair as a predator and herself as his unwitting prey. The hope that had flickered so brightly just moments before now seemed a cruel illusion. Meanwhile, across the city, the Duke of Blackwood sat in his study, the rich scent of leather and old books doing little to soothe his agitated mind. He had left the ball abruptly, the image of Eleanor's pale, troubled face haunting him. His attempts to discredit Finch had been carefully calculated, yet he found himself wrestling with an unfamiliar disquiet. He was accustomed to orchestrating events, to bending situations to his will, but Eleanor remained stubbornly resistant, a variable he could not control. He poured himself a glass of brandy, the amber liquid glinting in the firelight. His pursuit of Eleanor had begun as a matter of pride, a challenge to be overcome. Her defiance, so brazen and unexpected, had ignited something primal within him. But now, it was more than that. The thought of Finch, or any man, preying on her vulnerability, leveraging her precarious position, stirred a fierce possessiveness he hadn't known he possessed. He had intended to isolate her, yes, to make her see the futility of her resistance, but not to break her spirit, not to see her become a pawn in another man's game. The Duke paced the length of his study, the soft thump of his boots on the Persian rug the only sound in the vast room. He had underestimated the complexities of this game, had focused solely on his own desires without fully comprehending the ripple effect of his actions. He had created the very circumstances that made Eleanor vulnerable, the very whispers that now threatened to ensnare her. A realization, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through his self-assurance. He couldn't simply walk away now, not when his own machinations had put her in such a perilous position. His pride warred with a nascent sense of responsibility, a powerful, unfamiliar urge to protect her. The thought of Eleanor, alone and assailed by doubt, stung him. He had sought to punish her, but not to destroy her. The brandy, usually a source of calm reflection, offered no solace. He stopped before the grand bay window, looking out at the sprawling, silent gardens bathed in moonlight. A public rejection, a private pursuit, and now a subtle campaign of social sabotage. His tactics had been effective, perhaps too effective. He had created a dilemma for himself: retreat and allow Eleanor to potentially fall prey to a genuine opportunist, or escalate and bind her to him irrevocably. The choice, when it finally solidified, was both terrifying and exhilarating. He would not abandon her to the wolves, especially not the ones he had inadvertently drawn to her door. He would make a move so bold, so public, that it would leave no room for doubt or further manipulation. He would make her his, not through force, but through a declaration that would silence all whispers and shatter all pretense. The Duke of Blackwood would stake his claim, and the world would know it. A painful retreat. Eleanor watched the last carriage rumble away, its lamps shrinking to distant pinpricks against the encroaching twilight. The weight of the evening, thick with the Duke's possessive pronouncements and Lady Ashworth's venomous whispers, pressed down on her. The earlier encounter with Alistair replayed in her mind, his carefully constructed composure cracking under the Duke's dismissive words. Had he truly been nothing more than a calculating opportunist? The thought was a bitter draught, leaving a metallic taste in her mouth. She had wanted to believe in his sincerity, in the genuine concern she thought she'd seen in his eyes. Now, doubt, sharp and insistent, gnawed at her. She felt like a pawn, caught between the Duke's relentless pursuit and the cynical machinations of society. Retreating to her study, a sanctuary of books and quiet contemplation, Eleanor found little solace. The room, usually a balm to her agitated spirit, felt claustrophobic. She paced, her silk slippers making no sound on the oriental rug, a counterpoint to the turmoil within her. Every potential ally seemed to melt away, leaving her isolated on a precipice. The Duke's machinations were masterful, a slow, insidious tightening of the noose. He wasn't merely pursuing her, he was systematically dismantling her defences, one by one. Suddenly, a sharp rap on the study door startled her, making her jump. "Eleanor, are you in there?" It was Aunt Clara, her voice laced with an unusual urgency. Eleanor opened the door to find her aunt standing there, her face etched with a mixture of concern and a peculiar kind of awe. In her hand, she clutched a folded newspaper, its headlines stark and bold even from a distance. You won't believe this," Aunt Clara began, her voice barely a whisper. "The Duke, he's made an announcement." A cold dread seeped into Eleanor's bones. "What kind of announcement, Aunt?" she asked, her voice betraying the tremor she felt. Aunt Clara slowly unfolded the paper, revealing a prominently placed article. The headline screamed, "Duke of Blackwood declares intent to marry Miss Eleanor Vance." Below it, a formal notice, signed by the Duke himself, stated his unequivocal intention to make Eleanor Vance his Duchess, citing their long-standing understanding and mutual affection. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face, her vision blurred, the words on the page swimming before her eyes. Long-standing understanding? Mutual affection? She scoffed, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in her throat. "He's lying! This is an outrage!" Aunt Clara, however, seemed less aghast than bewildered. But Eleanor, A duke does not make such a public declaration lightly. This is binding. He's claimed you. Claimed me? Eleanor's voice rose, raw with disbelief and fury. I have not consented to this. I have not given him any encouragement. He is doing this to trap me, to force my hand. But why would he go to such lengths? Aunt Clara mused, her brow furrowed. The scandal of a rejected proposal is one thing, but this is a declaration of unwavering intent. It silences all other suitors. It makes you untouchable to any other man, unless he wishes to incur the wrath of a duke. Eleanor sank into her armchair, the newspaper clutched in her trembling hands. The room spun around her, the familiar scent of old parchment and leather suddenly cloying. This wasn't a pursuit. It was a siege. He had not just proposed, he had proclaimed. He had manipulated society's rules, using the very mechanism of public declaration to corner her, leaving her with no avenue of escape. His audacity was breathtaking, his possessiveness absolute. He hadn't just escalated the game, he had rewritten its rules, making retreat impossible. She was now irrevocably tied to him in the public eye. The thought was a chilling realization, a painful retreat from any semblance of an independent future she had envisioned. She was no longer just refusing a duke, she was defying a public declaration, a defiance that would now carry a weight far heavier than mere social impropriety. Her fight for freedom had just become exponentially more complicated. A long-standing understanding. Eleanor's voice was a whisper, brittle as dried leaves. She snatched the paper from Aunt Clara's trembling hand, her gaze scanning the bold type, then the smaller, insidious paragraphs beneath. The words blurred into a hateful tapestry of presumption and fabrication. He dares. He absolutely dares. Aunt Clara wrung her hands, her face a pale mask of distress. Eleanor, my dear, this is ruinous. No gentleman will approach you now, not with this published for all to see. He's made you his, in the public eye, without so much as a by your leave. The full weight of the Duke's manipulation crashed down on her. It wasn't merely a social slight now, it was a cage. Every word of the article, carefully crafted to sound like a mutual, if discreet, courtship, was a lie designed to strip her of agency. He hadn't just proposed, he'd claimed her, binding her to him with the invisible chains of societal expectation. Her fists clenched, crumpling the offending newspaper. The linen of her dress felt suddenly restrictive, the air in the drawing room thick and suffocating. He thinks to corner me, she spat, the taste of bile rising in her throat. He thinks to force my hand through scandal and public decree. He underestimates me. What can you do, child? Aunt Clara wailed, sinking into a velvet armchair. Deny it, and you become a liar. A woman who toyed with a duke's affections. Accept it, and you're lost. The desperation in her aunt's voice was a sharp counterpoint to Eleanor's burgeoning fury. She couldn't accept it, not this, not a life dictated by a man who saw her as a possession, a prize to be won through ruthless strategy. But how to fight it? A public denial would only fuel the gossip, turning her into a pariah, a woman who had dared to slight a duke not once, but twice. Her reputation, already precarious, would be shredded beyond repair. A knock at the door startled them both. "Lord Finch, miss," the maid announced, her voice pitched with a familiar apprehension. Eleanor exchanged a look with Aunt Clara. Alistair. What would he say? Would he offer support, or would he, like so many others, retreat from the brewing storm? She took a deep breath, smoothing her dress, determined to face him with composure, even if her insides churned. "Show him in." Alistair entered, his usually impeccable attire slightly dishevelled, a copy of the very same newspaper clutched in his hand. His eyes, usually alight with a spark of amusement, were dark with concern. "Eleanor," he said, his voice grave, "I came as soon as I saw this atrocious piece of journalism." He glanced at Aunt Clara, then back to Eleanor, his gaze searching. "This is a calculated blow, a move designed to isolate you completely. He's made it impossible for any other gentleman to offer his suit without appearing to challenge the Duke directly." "I am aware," Eleanor replied, her voice cool, belying the tempest within. "The question is, what can be done?" Alistair hesitated, his brow furrowed in thought. A direct refutation would be unwise, as it would only amplify the scandal. And even if you could find a gentleman brave enough to propose now, the Duke would undoubtedly crush him, making an example out of anyone who dared to interfere. He paced the length of the rug, his movements agitated. "He's played his hand expertly, I'll give him that. He's left you with very few options." "Options, Lord Finch, or lack thereof, are precisely what I seek to rectify," Eleanor declared, her spine rigid. "I will not be cornered. I will not be bullied into a marriage with a man who sees me as a chess piece." Alistair stopped, his gaze meeting hers, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "I admire your spirit, Eleanor, truly. But this is a powerful opponent. He holds all the cards." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "There is one unconventional path, though it carries its own risks." Eleanor leaned forward, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. "Tell me." "You must create an even greater scandal, one that makes this current declaration seem trivial," Alistair said, his voice low, as if sharing a dangerous secret. "Something so audacious, so contrary to expectation, that it forces the Duke to either withdraw his claim or risk public ridicule himself." Aunt Clara gasped, clutching her chest. "An even greater scandal? Alistair, are you mad?" Eleanor, however, felt a strange surge of adrenaline. "What kind of scandal?" she pressed, her mind already racing through possibilities, however desperate. The thought of fighting fire with a larger, more destructive fire was terrifying, yet exhilarating. It was a chance, however slim, to seize control, to reclaim her narrative. The Duke had made his move. Now it was her turn to reckon with him. A public declaration. "A counter-scandal?" Aunt Clara's voice was a reedy whisper, her hand fluttering to her chest as if to quell a sudden palpitation. Her eyes, wide and bewildered, darted between Eleanor and Lord Finch. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the implications of such a suggestion. Eleanor, however, felt a strange surge of adrenaline. Desperation had a way of sharpening the mind, stripping away the polite veneers of society to reveal the stark, brutal truth beneath. The Duke of Blackwood had declared war, and she would not be a passive casualty. "Explain, Lord Finch," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the tremor in her hands. Lord Finch leaned forward, his amber eyes glinting with an almost predatory intelligence. "The Duke has announced your courtship, Miss Vance. He has publicly claimed you, twisting the narrative to his advantage. To simply deny it would be to cast yourself as a liar, or worse, a loose woman who entertained a duke's advances only to reject him. Society would devour you." He paused, allowing the grim reality to sink in. But what if you were already claimed? What if the Duke's declaration, rather than being a triumphant announcement, became an embarrassing overreach? Aunt Clara gasped again, her eyes fixed on Lord Finch with a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. "You cannot mean—" "I mean," Lord Finch continued, his gaze unwavering as it met Eleanor's, "that you must appear with another man. Not merely an escort, but someone who, with an air of undeniable intimacy, publicly demonstrates a prior, more significant attachment to you. Someone who makes the Duke's claim look not only presumptuous, but utterly foolish." Eleanor's breath hitched. The audacity of it was staggering. And who, pray tell, would be so bold as to stand against the Duke of Blackwood? She challenged, a sliver of doubt piercing her resolve. A wry smile touched Lord Finch's lips. "That, Miss Vance, is where I come in." The proposal hung in the air, a dangerous, glittering thing. Aunt Clara wrung her hands. "Lord Finch, you would risk your own standing for this." He shrugged, a casual gesture that belied the seriousness of his offer. "The Duke and I have a history. Let us say I find the prospect of humbling him quite appealing. Besides," he added, his gaze softening as he looked at Eleanor, "I believe in fairness, and what the Duke is doing to you is anything but." Eleanor studied him, a whirlwind of emotions warring within her. Fear, yes, but also a fierce pride and a burgeoning sense of hope. This was a gamble, a colossal, terrifying gamble. But what other choice did she have? To cower, to let the Duke break her, or to fight with every last shred of defiance she possessed. "Very well," Eleanor said, her voice firm, the decision solidifying within her. "Tell me your plan, Lord Finch." They spent the next hour poring over the details, refining the strategy. The key, Lord Finch insisted, was timing and impact. The Duke's announcement had been discreetly placed in a reputable, albeit less widely circulated newspaper. Their countermove needed to be bold, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. It would take place at the Blackwood Charity Ball, a grand affair hosted by the Duke himself, scheduled for the following evening. As Lord Finch departed, leaving a stunned Aunt Clara and a surprisingly invigorated Eleanor in his wake, the weight of the decision settled upon her. The very air around her seemed to crackle with anticipation. She was no longer merely reacting. She was acting, forging her own path, however perilous. The following evening, the Blackwood Charity Ball was a dazzling spectacle of silk, jewels, and hushed whispers. The grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor shimmered under the crystal chandeliers, a testament to the Duke's immense wealth and influence. Eleanor, dressed in a sapphire gown that mirrored the defiant glint in her eyes, felt every gaze, every subtle shift in conversation, as she entered on Aunt Clara's arm. She could feel the ripple through the crowd as she stepped over the threshold. Heads turned, whispers started, a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. The newspaper article had done its work. She was a curiosity, a scandal in the making. Then he appeared. Lord Finch, impeccably dressed in dark evening attire, moved through the throng with an easy confidence, his eyes finding hers across the crowded room. There was an unspoken understanding, a shared resolve in that brief exchange. He offered her a small, reassuring smile, then approached, his stride unhurried. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a warm baritone, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips in a gesture that was both formal and exquisitely intimate. He held her gaze, a silent conversation passing between them. "You look breathtaking this evening." Eleanor felt a blush creep up her neck, a genuine reaction that lent credence to the charade. "Lord Finch," she replied, her voice soft. "It is good to see you." He then turned to Aunt Clara, offering a charming compliment before turning back to Eleanor, his hand gently finding the small of her back. The touch was light, yet possessive, a silent declaration that sent a tremor through Eleanor. This was it, the public declaration. As he led her into the waltz, Eleanor felt a thrill of pure defiance. The music swelled around them, a dizzying whirlwind of sound and motion. She could feel the eyes of the entire room upon them, sharp and inquisitive. And then she saw him. The Duke of Blackwood stood by a pillar, a glass of champagne held loosely in his hand. His gaze, usually so controlled, was now a storm of fury and disbelief as he watched them. His jaw was clenched, his eyes narrowed, fixed on Lord Finch's hand at her back, on the way they moved together, a seamless, intimate pair. Eleanor met his gaze across the ballroom, a challenge burning in her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she felt a heady sense of control. She was no longer the victim. She was a player in this dangerous game, and she intended to win. Lord Finch, sensing her resolve, tightened his grip, guiding her closer, their movements flowing as one. It was a dance, a battle, and a very public declaration.